Excellent. Thank you. Again, thank you, Denise, for being the power, the mitochondria behind this engine here, or the chloroplast.
There you go.
So yes. So I want to welcome all of you to this special event for Native Plant Appreciation Month. Our our Washington Native Plant Society is hosting a wide variety of activities this month to celebrate our native plants, and specifically this year, we're celebrating our native trees. The activities include webinars, plant sales, field trips, and volunteer activities, and you can always find what's going on at the website wnps.org. Our mission at the Washington Native Plant Society is to promote the appreciation and conservation of Washington's native plants and their habitats through study, education, and advocacy. If you're already a member, thank you very much for your support. If you'd like to become a member, please consider joining us. The membership in the Washington Native Plant Society supports native plant conservation and education. It also connects you with native plant enthusiasts in your neighborhood and across the state, especially with these virtual events. So please, again, you can go to the website anytime, wnps.org, to join and to find out more information about what's going on and our work. Before we begin, let's use the chat for questions. And Lynda has graciously become enthusiastic about answering questions as they come up. So between chat and raise hand, hopefully we can facilitate having a real dialogue going, which would be wonderful. So before we start with that, I would love to say that it is with great respect and with great gratitude that we are striving to improve our relationships with people, with our environment, but we also want to strive to improve joining our native cultures in stewardship for this land and for the native flora, the trees and the flowers and the flora of Washington. I personally am speaking from the homelands of the Pisquosa Wenatchee peoples, the original and continuing caretakers of this valley and these mountains. So with that acknowledgement and with great gratitude, it is now my great privilege to be able to introduce Lynda Mapes, the author of Witness Tree, and have her insights about the people that she met in the Harvard forest and the experiences with her oak tree, and learning about people that climb trees, set up webcams, look at chloroplasts under the microscope, and wonderful people like historians and librarians and a vast array of people that she was able to meet during her fellowship there. And with your permission, Lynda, instead of kind of reading about the fellowship, and you can tell us about your new one, which is exciting, but I would actually like to just use a little prose poem here that I found in the Witness Tree. And it is about photosynthesis, but for those of you who know, we're also interested in poetry along with native plants this month. I want to quote, speaking of the tree, its plumbing surges with food and water, coursing up, down, and out in a living, interactive connection to the earth, sky, and sun. Its leaves are abuzz with light energy, jolting chloroplasts into action. And I think that's wonderful prose poetry. So thank you for that. And thank you, Lynda, for sharing other insights with us tonight.
It's a total pleasure. It really is. I have to say that the Washington Native Plant Society is one of my very favorite organizations to interact with, and I'm a member myself. And as I was sharing earlier, before you all came online, the first time I went to my chapter, which is the Central Puget Sound one, I walked in and I thought, ah, my lost tribe, here they are. I love what you do. I love what you care about, and thank you for both. So tonight, we're going to talk about oak trees in particular. I spent a year at the Harvard forest studying, believe it or not, one tree, as a scientist would say, an N of 1, huh? But, you know, as a storyteller at the Seattle Times, which is where I work, it was clear to me that people were really not paying attention to the climate change story. They were tuning it out, and who could blame them? It's pretty gruesome. And I thought, but how can I get people to pay attention to this story? And I thought, well, maybe if I could find a living thing that people cared about, and the life of that thing already being changed because of climate change, maybe that would help. You know, maybe that would help people realize that it's not abstract, that it's not far away and way off in the future, but actually right here, right now, and actually already even in your backyard. So with that in mind, I had the good fortune of a fellowship, first at MIT in the Knight Science Journalism program there. And I met a bunch of people out at the Harvard Forest and got excited about some work they were doing to try to understand how you could see changes in the phenology, the regular progression of the seasons in the tree canopy as evidence of how the seasons are shifting in their timing. And I thought, aha. And then I met a scientist named John O'Keefe, who you're going to hear more about, who had for 25 years been walking a trail of the same 50 trees at the Harvard Forest and making intimate observations of when leaf bud was happening, when the leaves came out, how fast they grew. And then he'd go back out again in the fall and track senescence. And he had created this beautiful record, like something out of the Victorian age, of these 50 trees over 25 years. And so you had that gold, you had that deep time look into one place and a small geography. So you could actually get an appreciation for how things had changed. But it got even better. He also teamed up with a scientist at Harvard who had hit on a new technology of using, believe it or not, bank security cameras that he put up high in the canopy of a few trees to look out over the whole canopy and beam these images back to a server. And then he figured out an algorithm so that you could track, you know, first green up by looking at these images. So suddenly you had the forest and the trees. You know, you could look at the individual trees for ground truth, but you also had this canopy view. So this was brand new. Nobody had ever done this before. It's kind of like a digital observatory. And so between these two scientists, you had a really exciting possibility of an intimate look at how climate change was affecting a forest. And even you could look at one tree, which is what I did. I will now tell you all about that. I'm going to share my screen. I want to show you some pictures and tell you about this adventure, which was grand indeed. Share. I'm hoping you see something. See anything? I can't tell from my screen. Do you see anything? Yes? Look right?
You need to start the slideshow.
Okay, waiting from start. How's it look?
Still, we need just the slideshow.
Yeah. Okay. Ta-da. Looks
There
good.
we go. There we go. Good.
Okay, so here's the book cover. It's actually come out in paperback again since then. It's in a second edition that you can buy it from the University of Washington Press or any bookstore. This is the Harvard Forest. You know, a lot of people don't know that there is a Harvard Forest. A lot of people at Harvard don't know there's a Harvard Forest, but this has been true for a very long time. It's 4,000 acres of native New England wood, and it's out in the woods. This beautiful building, it looks like the rest of Harvard and Cambridge, is the only sign of Harvard and Cambridge. They're way out there in the woods off of Route 2. Near Athol, if you know the area at all, not far from Amherst, not far from UMass, all those places. So it's out there in a little town called Petersham, which is a classic New England wood. And this is Shaler Hall. It's the administrative office for the Harvard Forest, where I had an office, a rare thing for a reporter. And it's where all the full-time scientists who work at the forest stay. That's where they work. But then there's this visiting just tide of researchers and scholars from around the world who come to the Harvard Forest to learn about anything from soil to carbon to insects to trees. It's it's a beautiful place to be and to work. As I said, it's a classic New England wood. You see these giant sugar maples marching up the driveway. And don't you love the granite fence posts there where the horses used to be tied? And it's classic New England four-season climate. This was October 10th. Book your calendar for peak time in the forest for color. In New England, it's about October 10th. The Harvard Forest welcomes visitors 365 days a year. You can walk all the trails. You can ride a horse. You can't ride a bike. You can't use anything motorized, but anyone is welcome on their trails all year round. And it's a real boon to the community because they're lovely, wide, gentle forest paths that, you know, just endless walking through these classic woods. I like to say you can tell a lot about a person by their wood pile. Well, this is their wood pile. They actually heat the Harvard Forest buildings with wood. They ripped out the oil burner and decided to go sustainable local woodshed. And that's a lot of wood right there. And it's beautifully stacked, and it's mostly oak and maple, and it burns like nothing. This is where I lived. While I was at the Harvard Forest, that beautiful old grand dam of a house was built in about 1760, and it's been many times made over. And it's called Community House. It's where the visiting researchers live for anywhere from a day to a year. And that apartment on the end with the sun porch was mine. And I cherished my time sitting on that porch, looking out at this beautiful field and the forest. And the tree that I studied was just about a quarter mile away. So it couldn't have been more ideal for field work and deep study. The cows. I took care of the cows on weekends. That was a lot of fun. Somebody needed to feed them, so that was me. I said 4 seasons. The year that I stayed at the Harvard Forest, it happened to be that year of the really extreme winter back east. And at the same time out here, we had the really extreme early spring. So this is the year 2014-15. And the winter back there, they called it the killer winter. And they literally called out the National Guard to shovel out the red line. It was great. I loved it. So much snow, it never stopped. I absolutely loved it. You know, there's room for snow out in the woods. And, you know, that beautiful summery field and the sun porch. This is the sun porch in the winter. Look at how through a little ice porthole at my tree. You can just make out the metal tower of the security camera that I told you about poking out of the tree canopy there. So 4 seasons, it's the real deal. You know, if you want to study seasons, it's a good place to go. It's a very international place. Even though it's out there in the middle of nowhere, the Harvard Forest brings people from all over the world, and they bring their families. Ahmed Sadiq, who's at the sink there, this is his wife, Isra. They were from Sudan. Ahmed was getting his PhD, and Isra and the 2 kids, we're getting a taste of life in Massachusetts. And so what did I do? I taught Isra how to make an apple pie. She got it immediately, obviously, because she was an amazing cook. But it made it a lot of fun. You know, this the thing about scientists, I don't think I had fully appreciated this as a reporter, that it really is such an international community, and it's such a collegial community. And my friend Erin Ellison in the purple shirt is getting Ahmed dressed to walk to get his PhD. It was a beautiful day to watch that incredible accomplishment. And, you know, Erin had taken extra pain to bring in an international student and get him through the process. And I just really enjoyed seeing all the sharing that goes on internationally in science. We hear a lot about the competition and all that, and it is cutthroat, but there's also there's a very beautiful ethic of sharing and collegiality that I really enjoyed. And at the Harvard Forest, you know, because we're out there in the middle of nowhere, we made our own entertainment. This is us on Thanksgiving, bringing in all our dishes from our houses that we shared for dinner. You know, it's a good thing to be in the middle of nowhere. People, I think, cherish friendship a little more, and they take care of each other in a community kind of way. But, you know, mostly, of course, it was all about the science and the research for the book. This concept of how do you tell the story of climate change through a single 100-year-old oak? It meant going out on a lot of field trips with researchers, such as Neil Peterson here in the red shirt. He's coring that tree. We went out on a big tree coring expedition one day because they were very interested in growth rates. And obviously you all know this, the best way to know how a tree is growing is go inside and take a look. Tiny little core, so skinny it would fit in a drinking straw, so it doesn't hurt anything. But it does tell you this history over time of how the trees are growing. And the thing that came out of the research at the Harvard Forest that fascinated me, they have a whole series of different kinds of data that they've been collecting, and they have the longest record anywhere of carbon sequestration in a forest. And they do this by a range of methods, physical ones like this, coring, but also eddy covariance, measurement of gas exchange, instrumentation. And what they've discovered is that oak trees like mine, they're bench pressing carbon. They're growing faster than at any time in the history that they've been charting. And they believe that's for several reasons. One is it's warmer. You know, we have these extended supersized growing seasons. So they've got that. Furthermore, they've got all that food. I mean, all that carbon in our air it's great for them. As long as they have water, you know, they can pour on the growth, and they are seeing that at the Harvard Forest. They're seeing faster growth rates than any time since they started this record about 50 years ago. It's not easy to core an oak. This is Andrew Richardson. He was the principal investigator on this work in the woods using the cameras that I talked about. And, you know, it was interesting. I worked with Andrew a lot down in Cambridge at the Harvard campus, and he hated it there. He was one of these people who really was only happy in the woods. And I love that about him. They offered him tenure, and you know what? He turned them down so he could go out and work in Arizona. Okay, you're truly someone who loves nature. I was very impressed by that. This is the observation platform that I told you about. So you see the cameras up there. They're up there doing some maintenance on the tower. This tower is 120 feet high, and there are 3 of them in the Harvard Forest. And they have a very wide look at the canopy. If you want to look at my tree and you want to look at these canopy views, all you have to do is go online to the Harvard Forest website, and you type in witness tree, and you'll see there's a whole page there about my project, about the book, and you can look at my tree. You can check it every day. I do. See what kind of day it's having. This is John O'Keefe. You see the spreadsheet there on his desk. This is the clipboard that he takes out into the woods to do his observations. We're down in his office, which is a little hidey hole in the basement at the Harvard Forest. And he was just a tremendously sincere and lovely person who loved to share his work. And, you know, he had that kind of old school naturalist's understanding of the woods. He really believed in the value of natural history and personal observation and continual observation in one place over a long time, both the value of it and the pleasure of it. And I have to tell you, in this era where everything is modeled and everything's all computers and all that stuff, I'm not saying that's obviously incredibly valuable, but to be with someone whose idea of a great day was to go for a walk, man, that felt good. And he taught me so much, you know, his knowledge of the New England woods. I grew up in New York, so that is my set point. That is my native ecology. But, you know, he knew all the plant names, and it brought all that back. It was funny, you know, going out there after living in the Pacific Northwest for so long, I almost felt disloyal, you know, or pushing out the native plant names from here and bringing in, you know, hobblebush and all that stuff. Native plants, they go deep, don't they? You know, when you know your native plant ecology and you hold it close, you carry that with you. You carry it every day, you carry it where you go. And it was interesting. I really felt the switch as I went back to New England. David Orwig, dear friend, he's a full-time scientist at the Harvard Forest. His specialty actually is the invasion biology of this insect. It's called Woolly adelgid, and it's busily destroying white pine all over. It's so sad, eastern white pine all over New England. But David here is coring my tree. Yeah, my very tree. And the reason for that is I told John, as he's telling me about this long-term record that he had about the phenology in the forest, I said, John, you know, I've got this idea for a book that will look at how climate change is changing a tree. I need a tree. Let's go find a tree on your path, so that I know I've got a lot of data and I've got science to tell this story of how it's changing. And so he said, okay, fine, you know, let's go for a walk. We'll go find you a tree. So we auditioned trees. And I knew what I was looking for. You know, we stopped at this beautiful little maple that it's a lovely variety we don't have out here. It's called a goosefoot maple. And it makes a beautiful lantern yellow leaf in the fall, and with a long, and in the spring, its leaves have really long tresses, just like our big leaf maple have the tresses now that just stop me in my tracks. But it was too small, you know, and they don't live very long. So no, we weren't going to pick that. Then we moved on to the oldest tree in the Harvard Forest, which is 350 years old, not much by out here standards. But it was a sweet gum. I thought, nobody's going to know what that is. They can't relate to that. So never mind, we didn't do that. And then when we came into this part of his path, John kind of tipped his head back and he said, you know, I think this might be the one for you. And I looked at it, and it was big. It had a big old 60-foot wide crown. It was, you know, about 120 feet high. It had this fantastic gnarly bark. It clearly had some age on it. I said, yeah, that's fantastic. It just has to be old enough. So we went running back to Shaler Hall. We got Dave's coring gear, and we came back out and we cored it on the spot. Did a little field count, took it back to the lab, and damn if it wasn't 100 years old. Thought, okay, that's great. I got my century. That's what I need. So that became my tree. No, I didn't name it. I didn't call it Luna. I didn't make it a he or a she or anything. I wanted to keep its own sovereign, just, you know, it's an oak tree. Let it be. So, you know, I do think of it as my tree in a way, but it's BTQUR4 was its sample name. So this is what we did for a glorious year. You know, my job was to go out in the woods and look closely at this tree and watch it go through its changes. And of course, do all the background research about the phenology of the forest and how it was changing. And then try to really teach the public about carbon and climate and how it all works and why trees take carbon out of the air and are helping to buffer some of the worst effects of climate change, to really try to teach about that in a physical way, in a direct way through nature, so that hopefully people could connect to it. So the book is built in 10 chapters. There's a whole chapter about carbon. You know, what the heck is it? How is it that we know that the carbon that's in the air is from the fossil fuel that we're burning? Just the whole story of the carbon swamps, and you know, the fact that the rate of change that we're inflicting on the globe is so incredibly fast because we've released in 150 years, you know, geologic time scale amounts of carbon, and that's never happened on our planet. So the book, you know, is built from nature, from experiences in nature, to step people through the science in a way that I hope will be immediate for them and understandable. And John was the key to that. We went on these glorious walks twice a week. And we'd go out with a clipboard, and he would take note of these detailed changes in the forest, everything from the understory and what was happening, were the frogs singing, were the leaves starting to turn, were they 3/4 turned, were they halfway turned, you know, where were they in their seasonal progression? We didn't make very many measurements, but we did carry a little ruler, and every now and then, like in spring, we'd be measuring the bud break, you know, how much had the buds swelled, how big were they, how was that progressing? Here we are going out in the spring and May. I'll say this about New England, man, everything wants your blood. We have it so good out here, you know. Back there is black flies in May, and it's mosquitoes in June, leeches in the pond. I mean, everything wants your blood. And ticks. Ticks are very serious. We have this horrible thing called Lyme disease. So I would suit up in this ridiculous looking outfit to go out there just to try to protect myself from ticks. And then you really had to check yourself every night because they're very tiny, super, super tiny. And I never did have a problem. And that's belly crawling around in leaves and taking pictures and climbing and being out in the woods all the time. I did fine. So it's possible, but it is threatening. You know, we don't have that problem out here. And the humidity, oh my God, give me cold any day, but wow. Here we are. It's about June 1st in this photo, and I love the high tide of ferns. And, you know, John he's peering up at the top of the canopy to try to decide if the leaves have fully emerged. You know, where are they in that stage of early growth? It's just like we're used to here, where you've got that beautiful slow change from bud to first growth to, you know, the leaves begin to stiffen, they get darker. We paid attention to all of those stages. The other thing that I brought into the book was history. I thought landscape history was a very important piece of this story. And at the Harvard Forest, they have delicious archives. I mean, as only Harvard could pay for in terms of vellum maps and old farm journals from the area and, you know, glorious glass lantern slides. That's what I would do on my snowy nights by myself. I'd go into the archives and just prowl. And the stuff I found was just fantastic. And this journal is one of those real finds. This was kept on the Harvard Forest. Started out in where the farmhouse that I'm living in there that you saw, the white one, it's on the old Sanderson farm, which was the core of the beginning of the Harvard Forest. And this is the journal from that farm kept by John Sanderson at the time. And in reading it, you get a sense of how people lived on the land so recently and how much we've left behind about that. I think the other thing I really treasured there was I came across the journal of a farm wife who lived just down the road from where I was sitting as I read her journal. And it was a very important reality check for me, you know, because reading her journal, I saw climate change a little differently. I realized that, look, you know, nobody set out to cook the planet. People were just trying to have easier, more interesting lives. I mean, I read about her life, and every night, you know, she'd write in her journal the word weary, and sometimes she'd underline it twice. And, you know, at least the men were outside farming. She's caning chairs and making butter and washing clothes by hand. And I mean, her life was so hard, and kids didn't have childhoods. You know, they worked as soon as they could walk. And they didn't live very long. She lost a lot of her kids, and they were in the cemetery right next door to where I was writing my book, you know. So it gave me a reset. It made me think, okay, you know, let's just kind of put down the guilt and the blame and appreciate where we are and why we're there, and understand that those of us who have benefited from this fossil fuel revolution need to find a way to make it fair for other people who are still struggling to come out of you know, really hard, difficult lives. How do we make it fair? Everybody can't pollute like we have for 150 years. No way, the planet will never make it. But where is the equity in the equation of how we go forward? How do we break the connection between carbon and prosperity? That's really our challenge, isn't it? Here's my tree in spring. Isn't it godly? Isn't it just unbelievably beautiful? That first fizz of spring leaves. You know, and it was beautiful in every season. I mean, here it is in summer, that glorious full leaf of summer, fall, you know, that first color. This is actually the cover photo for the book. And in winter, you know, the winters there, I love the winters because it's not like our winter. It's real actual cold and deep snow and blue skies, a lot of sun. And because I was living there, I could go out all the time and see these things that change very quickly, like this liminal frost that you see on the branches up there. That was just there in the morning, and you know, by 10:30 it was gone. But that beautiful sparkly icing all over every single twig, it was just so beautiful to see those moments in nature, day by day, hour by hour. One of the things I did that I really enjoyed was I went out there with 2 bean bags of Thoreau's journals. I'm not talking about you know, his finished work, his beautiful prose, like, you know, his books. I'm talking about his journals, and there are many, many, many of them. And I thought it would be fun every day to take a page, you know, okay, it's January 18th. What was he doing? And very often he was doing the same damn thing I was. He was out there walking around in the woods. And one day it was a kind of snow, you know, there's so many different kinds. When you get the really flat, sparkly plates, you can really see the geometry of the individual flakes. And as you turn your head, the snow sparkles. It's dazzlingly beautiful. And a few of the flakes were on the sleeve of my Filson coat, which is a beautiful dark charcoal gray. And they really were like diamonds in a jewelry box. And I went back and I looked at Thoreau's journal, and you know what he had said that day, same day? He said, it's snowing geometry. Yeah, there you go. A lot of things change, but nature, that's one of the things that's so comforting about it. You know, snow, the beauty of snow, trees, the beauty of trees, the beauty of the native plants that we love and have in our lives. That's sustenance right there, of many kinds, including for the soul. This beautiful native lady slipper, Orchid, the woods were full of them. The Harvard Forest has not only a glorious canopy, but a beautiful understory. It's a native understory very few weeds. You go there at the time of the spring ephemerals, it'll knock your socks off because it's that brief time when that sunlight is hitting the forest floor, and these plants that wait all year for their brief window, boy, they put on a show. And I spent so much time on my belly peering into these blossoms and trying to photograph them. You can never capture their full beauty. They're quite large, by the way. They're probably as long as your index finger. And the colors. I mean, we all know this New England fall color, but God, it's just ridiculously beautiful. This is a single twig of a white oak. One twig, all these colors and the vividness. And it had rained, so it's all the more beautiful. I think one of the things I really appreciated about the opportunity to be there year-round was taking the time to observe these seasonal changes. I hope right now in this wonderful spring that you're all going out every day and reveling in the little tiny changes every day that we're observing. And for me, it was everything from this mushroom that had so recently sprung up that it still had the little shredded leaves on its cap, and the poetry of a bird track, this unfinished stanza, who knows what came next in its life. The quiet moment of the red Fs after a rain, they'd be out on the march. I just love these little guys. They're about as long as a finger also. And those spots, the camera didn't pick it up. The spots are kind of iridescent, and they have this noble bearing, the way they hold their head up and they've got that little march that they do. I just thought they were spectacular. You had to really watch out for them because they would come out in mass after a rain and they'd be all over the paths. The frogs, all the sounds of back east, you have the fantastic incantation of the night insects, and then their spring peepers are different from ours. It's a different trill. And it was really fun to be there long enough to hear the spring peepers and also see the tadpoles, the whole cycle of life. I kept records in many different ways. I made sound recordings on my iPhone. I took a lot of pictures, a lot of pictures. Actually blogged while I was at the Harvard Forest. If you look up my website, you'll see I kept a witness tree blog and wrote quite frequently about what was going on in the woods, what I was seeing, what I was thinking about. I also pressed flowers. I have a couple of flower presses, and I really enjoyed the native plants, pressing them in season. And that was another way I kept records. I also had a lot of field notebooks. I filled so many field notebooks. And then at a certain point, it was like, oh yeah, I'm like supposed to write a book, right? I better get cracking. I actually didn't start drafting until January. I got there in September around Labor Day. And I really did spend the first chunk of time just being in the woods and going out with the scientists and doing research and reveling in the learning of what nature can teach. And then when I started writing in January, I wrote a chapter a week until I had a first draft, April 15th. And then it was all about revision. I'm a fast writer. I draft very fast, but then I take a lot of time for revision. It's one thing I tell anyone who wants to write anything: save yourself time for revision, a lot of revision. The best writing comes from a lot of revision, I think. That's what I think. Done it a lot. And I also felt like if I was really going to know my tree, I needed to climb it. I mean, that was kind of a bold move. I'm not a kid, obviously, and I hadn't done that other than as a kid. So, and it's a different deal with a tree like an oak. You got to deal with the fact that the first 20 feet, there are no branches at all. So this was going to be rope and harness climbing. So I hired someone. I hired Melissa Levangie, who is the tree warden for Petersham. They have this in Massachusetts, and we should have it here. They have a tree warden in every town. And their job is to educate the public about their trees in the public spaces, and also to pay attention to their health. And if there is a tree that there's in the public space, whether it's a park or right away, whatever, somebody thinks needs to come down, they have a hearing at the tree. I like that. So tree wardens, why don't we have one? It's in the shade tree ordinance in the state of Massachusetts. Anyway, Melissa was our tree warden. So I called her up and I said, I need to learn how to climb. And she said, okay. And she came out to the Harvard Forest, and there I am climbing. So what the hell, I got health insurance. I'm not afraid of anything. Let's give it a try. And it was fantastic. There I am up there, ever the reporter taking my notes. when you're in a tree, it's so different. You're looking out into the canopy, not just at the canopy from the ground. And the animals notice you, you know, the birds see you, they call to you, what are you doing here? And you see the complexity of the canopy, how the tree you're in grows just to the edge of the tree next to it. And the two branches of the two trees, you know, they don't touch. They keep just this little bit of space between them. And you know, they have a lovely word for that. It's canopy shyness. So being in the tree was a total gift. And the other thing that happens is it's moving. You know, the tree is moving. It's going sideways. The branch is going up and down. I mean, when you come down from a tree, you have that same kind of motion, sea legs, that you have when you get off a boat. That was a surprise. I had no idea. So it transformed my relationship with the tree. I climbed it in all 4 seasons. It was different in all 4 seasons. It really had a firmness like iron in winter. Here's summer. Finally, I got to climb it in, you know, full leaf. And Melissa and her sister surprised me. We packed a picnic for this because we knew it was going to be our last climb together. So I packed a full picnic, roast chicken, thermos of tea, dark chocolate, a real picnic. And they surprised me by going up the night before and putting this hammock up there so I could hang out, which was fantastic. I actually took my laptop up there and wrote a little bit of the book. It's where I wrote some of my favorite passages in the book, actually. So, you know, climbing it, I would really recommend learning how to climb. If any of you are interested in that, I would tell you, it's not at all difficult. It's not threatening. You don't have to be athletic. They've got these great things called ascenders, which you put on your feet, and, you know, it's just no harder than climbing stairs, honestly. And if you pay attention, you go with responsible people in good gear. It's really a beautiful experience. It will transform your appreciation of trees entirely. So that's the book. And I want to share a little bit more about some of the other findings that came out of the work with these scientists. And those include, you know, they noticed not only was the tree growing faster than they had expected. You know, they thought at 100 years, oak trees slow down, unlike Doug fir out here, which is really just starting to gallop at that point. So they were surprised at the rate of growth. The other thing they discovered was that they were not, underscore not, taking advantage of the longer growing season in the way that they had expected, however, that they were still losing their leaves at kind of the same time, even though the seasons were longer. So why was that? Well, there were a couple theories. One was that the leaves are done, you know, that the tree has been beat up, torn up, sunned on, rained on, eaten by insects. The leaves are just done, so they're going to fall off. That's one hypothesis. Another one was that the tree has done its work for the year. It has enough food. It's got done what it needs to get done, so it's going to senesce. It doesn't need any more, so it's not going to do any more. But the third one, which I found kind of chilling, honestly, was that really what's happened is that the tree and the seasons are out of sync. The tree is still running on the time of its ancient ancestors, whereas the seasons are now on a different schedule. They're on a schedule made by us because of how we've torqued the climate. And the idea of this asynchrony is, for one thing, just disturbing because seasons have always been bigger than we are. And the idea that we're affecting as profound as the seasonal clock, to me, it's a big wake up. Secondly, if that asynchrony grows enough, you can start to have real problems, such as, you know, the leaves are unfurling before the birds have come that, you know, need to feed on the caterpillars that are on the leaves. All of this in nature, everything is where it is, when it is, for a reason. It's not random. None of it's random. It's all perfectly timed. It's like our salmon out here. Every salmon has a genetic coding of timing, when it comes out of the gravel, when it goes to sea, when it comes back, and it's built on the seasons of melt out. And, you know, there's such a beauty in that to me. I find it just incredibly beautiful to think about the complexities of nature and its timing and how everything has its season. It truly does. And the idea that that is slipping was disturbing. So those were some of the takeaways from the work. I would say that additionally, what came out in John's record over the 25 years was, a shift of about 7 days in terms of when spring was starting. It's earlier, it's that much earlier. That's a lot. It's really a lot. But the bigger change actually wasn't on the spring end. It was on the fall end. Fall was coming so late, deep fall, first frost. Now used to be, October-ish, and now it's Thanksgiving. That's a lot of a change right there. And then winter also has changed, less snow, fewer days of really, really deep cold, which is one of the reasons the woolly adelgid bug is on the march, because it's not getting killed off like it was. So, there it is. You can't deny it. And to me, that was one of the things I wanted to show people. Okay, you don't want to believe the politicians. You're sick of the dueling press conferences. I don't blame you, but look to nature. She's speaking. Plants are demonstrating in the garden. The trees are talking to us. This is real. It's here. It's now, and it matters. So with that, I'll say thank you, and I'm really interested to hear your questions.
I have a question for you, Lynda. I saw in your article in the Seattle Times in mid-March, you were able to interview Suzanne Simard.
Oh yeah,
the University of British Columbia, and I'm wondering if you were able to share any insights that you have after interviewing her, given your life with the witness tree, but also with her work as well.
Yeah. So thank you for bringing that up. This was a really blessed day to be able to spend a day in the woods with her. I was up on Vancouver Island covering the terrible cutting of the old growth up there. Even we don't do that anymore. We don't cut 1,000-year-old trees anymore on federal lands. They've been protected for a long time under the Northwest Forest Plan. State old growth is protected. It's sad. It's past sad, and there isn't a scientist in the world who would defend cutting 1,000-year-old trees in the rainforest. It just shouldn't be happening. I mean, you can't find a scientist who would defend it. And the fact that BC is still doing it, fits with their extractive economy. They're building, they're twinning the Trans Mountain Pipeline tar sands oil pipeline. They're cutting old growth. They have gigantic infrastructure of fish farms. I don't know, it's problematic. And we, as their neighbor, we suffer that. It's one connected Salish Sea, it's one connected biodiversity. And so there has been a lot of pushback against this cutting. The war in the woods is still going on there in a big way. They went through it with Clayoquot Sound, but that didn't end it, not at all. And it's back in a big way at a place called Fairy Creek, which is a small valley at the south end of Vancouver Island. It's never been cut. And the environs around there include a lot of other forests that also have never been cut. And about 2 summers ago, actually a kid from Washington State, Joshua Wright, he's from Union, he is a kid. I mean, he's like 16. He's just one of these kids who's a genius with maps and online mapping tools. And he was able to determine that there was going to be some road building into this last valley called Fairy Creek in this drainage. And he put out the alert to some environmental organizations up in BC, and they began blockading. Seriously, just went there and set up camps and started blockading the logging so it couldn't happen. And that grew and it grew and it grew and it grew. And then it became the largest civil disobedience in modern Canadian history. More than 1,000 people have been arrested at this point, and they went through 2 summers of this. So I went up there with photographer Steve Ringman last fall to document what was going on, the war in the woods, and also talk to the native people who were part of the cutting because they get a proceed from it. That's the Pacheedaht Nation, and understand why are they doing that? What's their thinking on it? I wrote a whole story about that. I wrote a 2-story package, and it's online. I invite you to look at it. And the second day was all about the forest itself. What makes it special? Why is old growth so special? And you're going to hear more about this from Jerry Franklin in a couple of weeks. Old trees are not just bigger young trees. They're different. They're ecologically different. and they provide different gifts. And what Suzanne was talking about, in addition to the forest and its species and why old growth is so important to carbon and to biodiversity, she talks about how these very large old trees, she calls them mother trees. And she's written a beautiful book. It's called Finding the Mother Tree. I really recommend it too. It's also out on Audible, and it's wonderful because she reads it. And in what she discovered in her lifetime of her work is the connections between trees underground through the mycorrhizal network. And what they're doing in that network is shuttling nutrients between trees, between different species of trees, and even preferentially from other trees to their own kin, which is really interesting. And she revealed this network of sharing that blew people's minds, because we've always been taught, haven't we, that it's all about competition in nature. And that's still going on, of course. We know about allelopathic species such as black walnut that actually kill everything around them. But nonetheless, what she revealed was there's a whole other reality going on out there in the forest, which is they're all connected, and they're connected in communities of trees that are sharing nutrients and water, and even communicating through chemical signals about threats, whether it's insects in the canopy or other threats to them. My oak tree could signal a tree next to it that it's under attack by wasps, which would get that tree next to it armoring up with protective chemicals, phytochemicals in its leaves. So, you know, you got to be humble. We mammals, we people, and in particular, we have a lot to learn from the trees, from the orcas. And what I really appreciated about Suzanne's work was what she went through to learn it. You know, this is field science, and she was at the cutting edge of it. So she had to devise the experiments to learn these things. You know, it's not like it's in a book. You have to figure it out. If I want to understand how or if something is moving from one plant to another, how am I going to know that? And so she got stable radioactive isotopes and packed them out into the woods, and we put a plastic bag over one seedling and, you know, pump it up with this stuff, and then look with a Geiger counter to see if the radioactive isotope was picked up in the other, and damn if it wasn't. And that's how she knew for sure. And she had to devise that experiment, pack it all out into the woods, and then survive the skepticism of her colleagues and the forestry industry, which was brutal. And this went on for decades, you know, but her truth has been borne out scientifically. And I won't spoil the book by telling you more about it. It's really worth reading. Her life story is incredible. And I can tell you, she's a lovely person. I mean, she burst into my Airbnb for our field day. She hadn't had breakfast, so she started rattling through the fridge and cooking herself an omelet. And we went off, we had our day, and it was a very, very long day. And it was kind of a day at the end of which, you know, you're giddy with laughter. I had some of the best laughs of my life with her. She's a very humble, warm, lovely person. So that's Suzanne Simard, and her understanding of the underground life of trees is it's really a revelation, and the discoveries just keep being unfolded. You know, her work is now she's starting to dig into other things that I think are really fascinating. She's working hard on this theory about how salmon can be seen in the trees, the nutrients of the marine derived nutrients. We already knew this, right? We've all heard this, that you can see the marine derived nutrients in the tissues of trees. But what she's come to understand is that these nutrients are traveling far further than we knew inland through the mycorrhizal network. So you've got this unbelievable pulse of nitrogen coming from the ocean far inland in this mycorrhizal network. It's just so beautiful. I see you put the links up there. That's great.
Yeah.
Somebody out there must have a question. You just got to have a question. You can ask me about anything. You can ask me about my work at the paper. You can ask me about my tree, whatever you want. What it's like to write a book. Oh. I'm going back to the Harvard Forest. So I'm going back in September. I got another Bullard Fellowship. I can't believe it. I get to go back. I'm going to write another book, actually about the life and work of Jerry Franklin and his understandings about old growth trees, how he learned what he learned, the process of that, the history of that science, but then also about old growth trees themselves and natural forest ecosystems. And I'm going to be making that a continental look. I'm going to start off in the East Coast and look at the loss of the primary forest and what that's meant for the native ecology and people, and then come across the country all the way to BC.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Oh, that's going to be very exciting. I'll put the link up here for next week's conversation with Jerry Franklin, as interviewed by Clay Antio, as our second to the last event, sponsored by the Native Plant Appreciation Month Committee. That's the link. Challenges in our Doug fir forests. There's also going to be a talk on Monday, and it's about our possessive, but it's about our oak tree, the white or Gary oak of our region. And the title by David Peter from the Forest Service is The Story of an Arboreal Shapeshifter. And I think the story of that particular oak species is going to be more focused, of course, on the West Coast, but I'm looking forward to that also. Your oak was a red oak, Lynda. Yeah. Do you have any words of wisdom about that particular species compared to white or Gary oaks?
Oh, they're so different. I mean, the white oak, the thing about white oak and Gary oak, the same out here, they are such a premier wildlife tree. All oaks are, because of their acorns. You know, they're home to so many species, and the Gary oaks and the white oaks out here are just cherished species, and it kills me that we're losing them in the central Puget Sound region. The South Sound chapter of your Native Plant Society, I hope, is going to war over that. I mean, these beautiful Gary oaks are rare, and they're being chopped down for warehouses and driveways, and I don't know, it's just sick, really. But red oak, the reason I chose red oak was it is the dominant species at the Harvard Forest, and so they have a fantastic record there of carbon sequestration with regard to that tree. When you look at the record of sequestration at the Harvard Forest, that's mainly what you're seeing is red oak. So because of its longevity, because of its size, because it is the dominant tree in the forest, that's why I chose it. But the reason I chose oak as a species is because it is the most common tree species in the Northern Hemisphere. I mean, almost everybody's got some kind of oak in their life, in their yard, in their day, in their world. If it were an animal, an oak would be a dog. They're just so common, but so magnificent, and we have a deep and long cultural connection with oak. White oak was the shipbuilding, of course, and oak was the building material of choice after chestnut. It's just a very important tree to people, and it was a very important. Thank you. Somebody just put that up about the acorn as a source of protein to the indigenous people. Absolutely. When you go to California, those tribes, you see these rocks, big rocks with indentations in them, and that's from mortar and pestle work to grind acorns into flour. Really excellent protein source, high protein source. So yes, important to all life. Oaks are a staff of life. They really are. And I see a question here about, could I share about what kind of restoration is needed for our forests? And, I'll say the same thing about trees that we said about whales, just stop killing them. I mean, really, stop cutting them down. It's every tree matters. I don't care what species it is. I don't care how old it is. Every tree matters. And it's like the Marine Mammal Protection Act. People say, oh, look, the whales are doing so well. We have humpbacks, we have gray whales, we have porpoises, we have harbor seals, we have everything but southern residents, right? Well, why is that? Well, it's because we stopped killing them. It works every time. Number one, preservation, and number two, some of these forests that have been industrially clear cut and then replanted, monocultured, those forests need help. You can't. We've already altered them so hugely. They actually need intervention if they're ever going to be healthy forests again. That needs ecological thinning so that you can have some trees can grow larger again, and you can rediversify the species. So we have a lot of remedial work to do in forests that have been allowed to become these just dog hair farms. We really need to leave alone the mature natural forests so they can be the old growth of tomorrow. And we need to take care of the old trees, leave them be, let them go through their natural processes. And that includes in BC. And I see a question when you talk to the tribal members in Fairy Creek at BC. So this is this is one of those dissonant narratives. It's a situation where, for 150 years, the colonial extractive model up there was the white guys coming in and taking the trees from unceded territory. I mean, the treaties here, it's not like it was a great deal, but at least there was a deal. Up there, you have this thing called crown land. And as an American, it's like, well, what's that exactly? Well, what it is, it's land that they just took. And white people, since the colonial extractive era started, have just been taking those trees and getting rich off them. Well, interestingly, in this time of pushback in BC, the BC government has started offering new contracts for Native people, First Nations, and sharing revenue with them for these cuts, if in return they will not impede the logging. And in a place like Pachidot, this is a very small tribe, 300 people. It's in a very remote place, Port Renfrew. There isn't much else around. It's always been either the sea or the forest. And so they finally, for the first time, have their own sawmill so that they can do value added. It only cuts old growth. That's all it can do. It doesn't have the capacity for anything else. But they are, with this money, diversifying their economy. They have, for the first time, a gas station and a store. They need the same things everybody else needs. They need an economy. And so, you asked me what kind of restoration is needed. If people want to save the old growth, they need to find a way to make those tribal nations whole. You can't just say, well, we already cut it all and we can't cut anymore because the planet is cooking. So, we already took it all. Now that it's your turn, it's too late. It's the climate really demands that it not be cut, but it's not fair to just say, sorry, it's too late for you. So that needs to get worked out. It's really just like a small scale version of the same climate question on a global scale. But basically what they told me was, we need the money. And, we've waited long enough, and these trees are from our unceded lands, and, we need the revenue, and they do need it. So it's kind of where we were on the Olympic Peninsula decades ago, right? And I think it's interesting that Forks is about to open its first new sawmill in a long time. It's $1 million investment, and it's for cutting trees, tiny trees, for cross-laminated timber. So, yeah. Here's a question at Harvard Forest. Did anyone talk about the species shift in forests since chestnut blight and gypsy moth? Yeah, there's a lot of good science on that. It's fascinating. I think one of the first things anyone should do when they think about a forest is look at the pollen records for a place. And it gives you an instant reset to understand the panoramic view into the past of how our forests are always changing. Species coming, species going. We're talking now over thousands and thousands of years, millions of years. How our earth has changed, and then how the trees have changed along with it. And at the Harvard Forest, there's been this horrible parade of invasive diseases and insects going all the way back. And, the chestnut blight, there are chestnuts all over the Harvard Forest, but they don't grow much higher than about 30 feet. And then the blight gets them again and they come down. So they grow today almost as a shrub. It's a beautiful tree, but when you read Thoreau, he talks about hearing the sound of people beating the chestnut trunks in the woods to bring down the nuts. And he talks about the cacophony of the birds in the canopy of the chestnuts harvesting the nuts. I can't even imagine what it must have been like. But yeah, they went out and they're gone. And so in their place, we now have birch. We've got all kinds of black birch. And the question now is, well, what's going to happen when the eastern white pine is all gone? What will come in? And it looks like it's still going to be a forest, but it's now going to be a deciduous forest, which is very, very different. I mean, the light budget of an eastern hemlock forest is like 0. It's so dark in there, and and I'm sorry, I realize I've been saying white pine. It's eastern hemlock that the woolly adelgid is attacking. If you go from a very deep, dark hemlock forest to a deciduous forest, that's a completely different water budget. It's a completely different light budget. It's a different suite of birds. It becomes a different place. And our forests are constantly changing as these natural processes go on. And the ones that are truly natural are much slower than the ones that we're bringing through climate and invasive species. There's a really good book about hemlock at the Harvard Forest. It's called Hemlock, and it's written by David Foster, who's the former director of the Harvard Forest. And it's a beautiful look at that species and all of its life and times, going all the way back into deep time using pollen records. You know, there was a time when hemlock completely went away, and then it came back. And it came back just in time for the colonists to discover that its bark was really good for tanning. And then it came back from that, just in time for the woolly adelgid. So, you know, these species live these operatic lives of coming and going and endurance. And when you're a tree, you can't run away. You have to stand there and take it. And I think that to me is one of the really beautiful things about trees, you know, what they do for us, creating the air that we breathe, cleansing the air, food for animals, beauty for us. It's incredible what they do. And they can be in one place, the same place their whole life, even for centuries, and not impoverish it, but make it better. So with that, I'll say thank you and bid you good night.
Well, thank you very, very much, Lynda. We really appreciate it. And I will just thank you again for your efforts at educating all of us, not just on this event, but also through your work and your journalism. I'm going to end with one other quote from the witness tree, which is, "The notion that we are separate and autonomous from nature was untrue to begin with, but it is unsustainable now." So thank you for that.
So very welcome. We
Thank
need
you.
a tree culture. We really do. We need a tree culture. It's true.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thanks everybody. Be well.
Thank you.